Hello, Thailand. This is Kendall Bryan Hunter, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we don't take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. So today we're covering The Great Escape, Exodus 14 through 17. So I'm here, I got my little hoodie on, so I look like one of those preachers who dresses up like Justin Bieber. What's that from the Spider-Man movie, the cool youth pastor? Yeah, that's what I'm doing today, is a cool youth pastor thing. So, starts out our section 14 through 17, just a little bit of verses, but they pack a punch in it. So we start out, the madness continues. They have had the destroying angel, they've had Passover, the destroying angel has killed all the firstborn, so he said, get out of here. And as they're leaving, Pharaoh changes his mind again. The madness continues. The people want their slaves back. And I want you to think about that, too, about the nature of slavery and what it takes to liberate a slave. Especially in the United States, we had the Great Civil War, which is, even today, we're still dealing with issues of the Civil War over 100 years later. But also think about contemporary slavery, what goes on with the human trafficking and things like with disruption during war, like with the Russian-Ukraine war going on. So let's think about it. I mean, I'm not going to. This is get to the point. So I just covered the heads or the the rudiments of the stuff. So after that, you have the hot pursuit. Israel leaves. The Egyptians get in their chariots and start chasing them. And the children of Israel are free. And so what happens? They start complaining, murmuring. Now, in English, murmur is a good word. It's a form of onomatopoeia, which means it's an imitative sound, like buzz or zip or boing or bing. It just sounds like the noise that it makes. Cow, moo, quack. It just sounds like it. In English, the word murmur refers to the droning sound of bees, but in Hebrew, it's the strong number 8519. It's pronounced teluna, and refers to grousing, grumbling, bellyaching, that type of stuff. Normally in contemporary translations, it's translated as grumbling. And the children of Israel, they're freed slaves, but what did they say? It's better to serve the Egyptian. Now, as Americans, we have the mottos, live free or die, which is the motto of New Hampshire. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. And so in our conscience, this is kind of funny. We said, no, it's better to suffer and be free. But the children of Israel, they just wanted the security there. In fact, in Numbers 11, it gets really out of control. They want the flesh pots, and they want to eat the cucumbers that the Egyptian had, or rather than be free. And sometimes we phrase this as liberty or slavery, but that's not what the juxtaposition is. The juxtaposition is liberty or security. And that's what the appeal of Karl Marx was, is that he promised all the security. Now, it has never worked out. No country that has ever espouses the Marxism has ever been prosperous, but people fall for it. And this type of putting security over freedom, that's one of the warnings of the Old Testament. So the hot pursuit, they rush to the Red Sea, and you have the classic Charlton Heston moment of stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And for those of us who are the older generation, we've seen the Ten Commandments. It's the old school movie. It's fun. It's a good movie. It's not like how to do things now, which are hyper realistic, but it gets the point across. So Moses parts the Red Sea, and that goes back to his rod having the power over seas, but also in Moses chapter 1, where it talks about Moses having power over great waters. And the Joseph Smith translation brings out this point, is that you have the pillar that was light to the Israels, but it was a shadow over the Egyptians, so there's obscuring them in their hot pursuit. And another thing that happens is that the wheels of the chariot fall off. And I want to think about another thing is, so the Israel goes through on dry ground. Remember, this is not the sea parts, but it's going to be mucky. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so I understand high tide, low tide. When you get low tide, it's just mucky water and it has a really bad smell to it. But no, this is on dry ground. And so it was a miraculous event. That's why they emphasized the dry ground thing. It just wasn't receding tide or anything. The ground turned dry. But to think about the collateral damage, as we talked about the collateral damage of the innocent firstborns that died with the Passover, but also the innocent Egyptians that died, that they're in a situation where they just had to follow the king's order or they would have been killed. So it's you get killed by the king or you get killed by the water. How do you want to die? And that we take their death seriously as we take other people's death, but also think about what does it take to free a slave? How many people have to die in order to set people free? And you think about with church history that it happened before this in the antebellum period, before the Civil War, and how the Civil War kind of happened with the early parts of church history. And you see a lot of the stuff that comes up in the Doctrine and Covenants. And as you reread it again in a few years, you can pay attention to the slavery question. In fact, Joseph Smith's revelation on slavery, he got it on Christmas Day of all days. So they get freed, Exodus chapter 15, and you have singing. And this is an interesting chapter that, praising God and thanking God and expressing gratitude for what happens. That's part of worship, giving thanks. It's interesting, too, is that you have the women who are involved with singing and dancing and part of the poetry, and that dance is a form of worship. King David danced before the Lord. Then you have this interesting verse in Exodus 15, verse 3. The Lord, or if you notice in capitals, you look at the letter R, how R is not a lowercase r shaped like that. It's a uppercase R. And that means that in Hebrew, it originally said Jehovah. So it said Jehovah is a man of war. Christ is a prince of peace, but Jehovah is a man of war. And you remember in Matthew chapter 10, Christ said he's going to send a sword. And so people kind of gravitate that, okay, we're just going to deal with the lamb, but not with the lion. And you need to deal with both the lamb and the lion. That some of the pacifist movements, we always sue for peace, and we want it, and sue and pursue peace. But war is a reality. It's accounted for in the gospel. For example, when you read the Book of Mormon, you have the long war chapters and also the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the scrolls deals with armies. I think it's called the War Scroll. That later on you also have, the Book of Mormon covers the just war theory, but also the Doctrine and Covenants in section 98, where it says, okay, here's the parameters for fighting a just war. And we have the example of the people of Ammon, but that's just one thing in the mix. It's not the entire thing. Okay, everyone has to be people of Ammon. That sometimes the people in Ammon were virtuous, and so is Captain Moroni. And also later, Mormon was a general. Joseph Smith was a general. In fact, Lorenzo Snow actually went to War College at Oberlin College. He was studying to be a military officer, and his sister Eliza didn't like that, but she was willing to sew his military uniform for him. So kind of keep in mind is that what do you mean by pacifist? And does it square up with what we're reading in the gospel, what we're reading in the scriptures, and what the Lord has told us about the nature of war? So they enter the wilderness, and they have the food issues. You have the bitter waters at Mara. You have the manna, and the manna is where you start to see the Sabbath principle introduced, where they had to on Friday. Remember, this is a Jewish calendar, so Saturday is the Sabbath, not like it is we do in America. And on Friday, they'd have to get a double portion of manna to carry them through on the Sabbath, so there's no work on the Sabbath. And if you tried to hoard stuff, it just got really smelly with maggots. Then, and they also saved a portion of the manna and put that in the Ark of the Covenant later on. Then you had the quails, and then you had the water issue again. Remember, this is the desert. These are nomads in the desert, and water's an issue. And please remember, I was talking about murmuring a little bit earlier, but please remember, this is a real issue. Food and water are the issue. I mean, it's a survival thing, just like with, think about with Nephi and the broken bow, that you could die. So some of these concerns are actually valid concerns, but instead of complaining, you should be praying. That's what you do with your mouth. Instead of complaining with your mouth, you pray with your mouth. And as they're traveling, of course, they come upon some other nomads, and if there's a battle, and you see Joshua rise to prominence. And this is a situation where you have holding up, or Moses has to hold up his staff in order to keep the victory. And so you have the two people support his arms, and that's where you get a lot about sustaining when Isaiah talks about hold up the hands which hang down and strengthening the feeble knees. That, like I said, it's a symbolic thing about supporting leaders. And remember, it's not the staff. This isn't witchcraft. This isn't Harry Potter or Gandalf or Doctor Strange or, Aladdin from Sword of Shannara. This is a priesthood ordinance. that, or not say, it's a priesthood function, and God's doing things to teach us stuff about how you have to constantly support church leaders. So let's move to the end. Now, here we are at 10-minute mark. Let's do the Christ quotient really quick. So the first thing to think about is what it takes to free a slave. When you're liberating people, and you think about this in current political situation as we try and liberate slaves, what's involved with it and why is it such a difficult thing? The other thing to think about is how Christ frees us from slavery, sin, death, hell, our addictions. As we turn to Christ, we can get freed from those. Another thing to think about is to think symbolically. It's like when you're reading the rock, that's Christ. The parting of the Red Sea is a symbolic of baptism, as Paul points out. That's also how Christ parts the way in front of us so we can travel through. And you think about how manna, that's symbolic of Jesus Christ. And here's the last thing, is that keep in mind how, like with the children of Israel, Christ blesses us in our wilderness situations. And if we have eyes to see, we can see Christ. And that's the point. Bonus point. A number of years ago, President Russell M. Nelson gave a talk on parallels between the pioneers and the children of Israel. So I'll put a link to it below. But read up. It's an interesting and fun parallel. So thank you, Thailand, and I'll see you all next week.